more on the economics of education. I'm joined by Deani Van Pelt. She's director of the Barbara Mitchell Center for Improvement in Education at the Fraser Institute. And as you can see from Toronto, good to see you. Welcome to the show. I guess I have a million questions here for you, but let me start with this. In the last story we just talked about, we didn't talk about how the kids felt necessarily that are already in school. I wonder if you could maybe help us. How do they feel about homeschooling?
Certainly, there's been an awful lot of research in the last 30 years on homeschooling. The vast majority of it has pointed to the fact that in terms of academic outcomes, students that are homeschooled perform on average at a much better rate than those that are attending public school. Some of the research also covers not only academic performance of the students, but it also does look at life satisfaction. I was involved in a study in Canada a decade ago, and we looked at the life satisfaction of students that were currently being homeschooled, and we found that the scores were very high. In fact, they were higher than for any other group studied. But again, that's average.
I mean, I can see the advantages, and one of them just sort of the social aspect of getting the kids off Facebook for 20 minutes so they can focus on their studies. But there has to be a social downside, if you will, of not having your children around other children a lot of the time. And there's also the flip side of that as well. Has your research shown which one is better, I guess, in the long run?
So, okay, I think that you're bringing up two very good questions. What about the issue of socialization? And perhaps this goes back to a 30-year-old stereotype about homeschooling, several children sitting with mom at the kitchen table, and that is done 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 hours a day, 5 days in a row. But of course, as time has moved along, as curriculums have been developed, as we've been able to develop more technology, access to outstanding education curriculums, more and more of them are being developed. We find that access to good instruction via the internet it improves the quality of homeschooling and the way it's delivered. But even more remarkably is the way that families come together and collaborate and together in small groups. Perhaps they're hiring outstanding elite type. Perhaps they hire a physicist, or they'll hire outstanding music instructors, perhaps a choral conductor.
So they have the option of. So they have the option. Obviously, mom and dad aren't teaching everything about physics and music. I mean, there's experts to do that.
And I think that's exactly what is so brilliant about the nimbleness of homeschooling, that parents can collaborate, they can grab onto the opportunities that they're faced with. And again, as I said, with technology, there are so many different ways of delivering an outstanding education. And this is what homeschoolers have done. And as I've said, that not only are the results all pointing towards the fact that homeschool students, on average, perform their peers while they are being homeschooled academically, but also we've got evidence of what happens later on in adult life. For example, there was a study done by Cardis in 2011, 2012, and they compared the graduates of various sectors of education. So they took a look at homeschool graduates and compared them up against graduates of public school, Catholic school, other forms of private school, and they found that although, for example, homeschool graduates weren't quite as likely to attend university following their grade 12 homeschooling experience, if they did attend university, they were more likely than any other sector to go on and get a PhD. So it seems like someone who's homeschooled ends up being all in if they do end up going to university.
All right.
There was another fascinating study of
Barbara, I'm sorry, I only have time for one more question, just given that we're at the end of our show here, but I want to make sure I get this question because I want to talk about the economics. Okay, because
absolutely,
it costs money to send your kids to any school, public or private, and it costs money to have your kids stay at home with you to teach them as well. Tell me about the economics of this and which one is better?
Sure. Philip, that's an excellent question. In the U.S., an average of $11,300 is spent per pupil. In Canada, it's $11,800 per pupil to educate in a public school system. Parents spend, on average, less than $1,000 per student for direct costs for supplies and textbooks to educate their children at home. So you can see that the efficiencies in terms of saving the taxpayer and moving the expenses of education away from the taxpayer, away from the government purse, and into the first of all, it doesn't cost as much, but also it's the private sector and other collaborations of funders that are paying for this. So economically, homeschooling, we figure in Canada, for example, in very, very modest terms, if 20,000 students are being homeschooled at $10,000, the savings is over $200 million, up to $500 million, and that's just in Canada alone. In the U.S., of course, you would multiply those savings by at least
bigger
10.
Number.
Yes.
Deani, it's great to have you on our show. I wish we had more time. We're going to have you back again, but it's certainly, as you can see, a very big topic with a lot of questions. Before we go,